Hey listeners, Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. I get the privilege of working alongside all of the creators at Enrollify, but I wanted to take just a quick moment to tell you about why I love the application, the podcast hosted by Allison Tercio, AVP for Enrollment and Marketing at Siena College. The application is your playbook for the ever-evolving world of higher ed enrollment marketing. This podcast zeroes in on the niche, often unexplored areas of the field, delivering a potent mix of actionable insights, practical strategies, and cutting-edge perspectives. Some of my favorite episodes are on topics like activating your school's student influencers, mastering the student inquiry moment, and even a roadmap to web accessibility. Allison cuts to the chase and keeps you entertained in these short 30-minute episodes that drop every other Tuesday. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search the application wherever you get your podcasts.
When I was at Dillard University, one of my favorite colleagues was a guy by the name of Roland Bullard. He was then the vice president of student success. And one of the things I noticed about him was that he definitely cared about the students, but he also cared a lot about his student affairs team. Now, this is a longer conversation, but I thought it was really important to talk to him about the talent experience in student affairs because it is such a critical area at colleges and universities. And man, did he have a lot to say. Roland had a lot to say about life in student affairs and the importance of transparency about the work. Also, he had a great point to make about the impact of employee morale on student morale, what it looks like for someone to come in and help grow the culture of student affairs, and also what institutions need to do to help ensure a fulfilling talent experience in student affairs. So we'll just say that these are your big takeaways from the interview. So sit back, relax, enjoy a really, really robust and actually a pretty entertaining interview with Roland Bullard on this episode of I Want to Work There. No matter the institution, company, or organization, everyone wants to find the best talent, and everyone wants to keep their best talent. Higher education is no different. I'm Eddie Francis. I've worked in both talent acquisition and higher ed marketing. On this podcast, we're going to explore the ways to create a great experience for faculty and staff on your campus. Because in education, a great employee experience equals a great student experience. And who doesn't want that? We'll have some honest conversation, get insights from experts, and hear success stories from campuses. It's all about developing an attractive employer brand, something that'll make the people say, I want to work there. Joining me on I Want to Work There is Roland Bullard. He's a former vice president of student affairs. He's a higher ed consultant. He's also a friend. He's a frat brother. Roland, it is so good to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Very good. And how about yourself, friend?
I'm doing good, man. I would be remiss if I didn't mention also that this man actually did a running with the Bulls, which is really, that is one of the coolest stories. I don't think I've ever met anybody who's actually done it. So this is a first. I'm honored.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. When you're done, you feel like you can conquer the world. At the time, you are afraid. And luckily, I had a friend with me everybody needs that guy who's going to say, you know what, we've come this far. Don't try to back out at this point. So I had a friend that did that with me. And then we conquered it. And we actually did it 2 days back to back, which was pretty crazy.
But you couldn't go back, right? They had let the Bulls lose, so there was nowhere to go.
No, they run for I think it's 7 days. They run 7 days in a row with 7 different sets of Bulls, and so that was something that I learned. I didn't know that either. I thought it was one and done, but so then it took a little bit of the air out of it because I was like, oh, it was there's all of these people, but there's thousands of people, and on day 1 through 7, you get up in the morning and you run. And if you stay out of the way, you'll be okay. If you don't, you're in a lot of trouble. So there's nothing like 12, 2-ton bulls running after you. You know what I mean? There's nothing like it.
Wait, well, what time of morning does this start?
It's probably 7:00 in the morning.
Oh man.
And the problem is that we're on, whatever the time frame is for Spain. And so really it's like midnight where we are. So your body feels like it's midnight. And, I was 40 something at the time. And so I felt like a 40-year-old at midnight, which is where I'm supposed to be sleeping. So I'll rethink that decision a lot of times, but I'm here and alive. So it worked out. So.
Run with the bulls, they said. It'll be fun, they said.
It'll be fun. Yeah.
So speaking of running with the pack, what led you to student affairs work?
Really and truly, when I started in student affairs, it really had to do with the really great undergraduate experience that I had. And I think all of us who went through, did fraternity life and student organizations, we all remember what it was like to be involved in those organizations and all of the great advisors and people who were transformational for us in life. And I had a great undergraduate experience. And when I did that, I was thinking at the time, wow, how great it would be to do this as my life's work. I really got connected in that way. And I'll tell you a real quick story. I go to my first year seminar class and I was really enjoying it. And then the next probably couple of months, all kinds of life things started happening to me. I lost my grandmother. I lost my father. I lost my grandfather, all in the span of about 14 or 15 months between my sophomore and junior year. And I remember at the time, and I thought about it years later, that there were people who came when I was in my residence hall who knocked on my door and said, "Hey, how's it going? Here are some services that you can take advantage of. Hey, want to come out to this program? And do you want to come out and enjoy this? Or do you want to come out and participate in this picnic or whatever the particular program was?" And when I thought about it later, those were the student affairs people. Those were the people who ran all the interventions. I was up on somebody's list. Now we know it as behavioral intervention teams and all of those kinds of really fancy names. But at the time, there was somebody who was sitting in a room who said, "Hey, this kid, Roland, has been through all of this stuff. And he's probably holed up in his room. And we've got to get out there and make sure that he doesn't fall off our radar and something bad happens, whether it's a mental health crisis or whatever that is." And folks showed up in my space, and it was the reason that I got connected in. And after a while, I started to go to a few more programs and really started to take advantage of the leadership opportunities. And years later, I realized it really and truly was student affairs that saved me in that moment, that allowed me to keep from falling off and being one of those students that doesn't come back. Because I had every reason not to come back. I had every opportunity to kind of say, you know what, this is too tough. Too many bad things have happened to me. Let me go grab a job in town. I was from about 35 or 40 minutes away, so it would have been really easy for me to go back home. But it was the student affairs people that came out, saw about me, and encouraged me to keep going. And so when I think about the hopefully the hundreds of students that I've been able to impact, I think about myself in those moments. And anytime you think you want to give up, or that the pay is low, or that you're not feeling appreciated, you think about the impact you can have on students' lives. And so I know that's a little too deep for the first question, but that really was kind of what happened for me. It really became a ministry for me.
No, that's perfect, because when we in the marketing and communications world in higher ed, when we talk about our work, of course, there are the people who are mostly on the communication side who will talk about getting that phone call at 2, 3 in the morning because something happened on campus. There's some incident on campus. You got to get to campus, or you got to get on the phone right away. You got to go deal with media and all these other types of things. But inevitably, while we're having that conversation, we know that we get in the thick of it. Of course, we know the administrators, we know the president will get these calls and everything. But then at some point, we all stop and go, can you imagine being in student affairs dealing with this stuff? And so we realize that, while we get the phone calls, we realize on some level, we got it kind of good because, we think about student affairs often. And I wanted to talk to you to really get people to understand what that world is like and what that talent experience is like. So with all the conversation about student affairs, especially, the conversations that we tend to have, for those who are not in leadership positions, we know about the pay, we know about the hours, especially those of us who have been in administrative positions. How accurate, though, is that? You brought up pay yourself. Mm-hmm. How accurate is that perception about low pay and long hours?
If I'm going to be completely honest, I have never really worked into a student affairs position and felt that I was on the road to financial security. So I'm not gonna to try to lead you to believe that that's where this is.
So wait, you never got to the point you're like, oh, mama, I done made it.
I'll be honest with you though. There was one time, and this is kind of off track, but there was one time I did, and it was the time that I transitioned from being a full-time grad student to being a full-time professional. It was in that one moment. That was okay. Because at that point you're making peanuts, and then they'll give you a whole bag of peanuts, and then you're like, okay, things are picked up, and then you realize then, because you've been living in a residence hall, what rent actually costs and what a house payment actually is, and you go, oh my. This wasn't as much as I thought it was. So let me go back to dorm living, so residence hall living. But no, I agree that the low pay is there and you have these issues. But I tell people, when I was a VP on a campus, I would interview every single person that came into the division. And I know it would slow down for all my directors, my former directors. I know it would slow down your process. But I would interview every single every single person that came into the division. And the reason I did that was because I really wanted people to look me in the face and say, this is the work that I want to do. And I was extremely transparent about salary. I was extremely transparent about the hours because I really needed people to understand that this is mission work. When you see teachers, when you see ministers, you see first responders. These are people who are on the lower end of the pay structure in our society. And for some reason, I don't know why it is, but we as a society don't value people who are the people in the trenches. And so when I think about the work, I talk to people about the intrinsic rewards, which are the ability to help the Rolands of the world who have gone through so much, but just need somebody to say, keep going. Yeah. And that's where the rewards come a lot of times. So the answer to your question is, are there long hours? Can the pay be a challenge from time to time? Absolutely. But it is typically not the reason you've gotten into the work. And as people who are in higher positions, there is advocacy that is needed to be sure that people at least get a little bit more in the terms of compensation. But in the interim, know that it's important work and work that is needed.
But it is, you brought up the irony of being on the front lines and the pay, and that does expand to so many other industries. I used to recruit in healthcare, and when I recruited in healthcare, there were a lot of customer service people that I had to recruit. And I remember sitting there talking to people going, hey, this is like a $12 an hour job. This is a $15 an hour job. But they were on the front lines. These were the people who were getting the angry phone calls. These were the people I actually recruited for a supermarket at one point. So the people at the register, they were the ones getting the produce thrown at them, literally in some points, So it's really so ironic. And for me, having worked in radio, those of us who are on the air, the guys behind the mics and the women behind the mic, we don't get paid as much as people think we get paid. It's a pretty low pay. And yet the listeners are going to call us about the crazy commercial that they just heard or something like that. So that is such an irony that the people who probably are on the front lines who get it worse are the ones who get paid the least in so many of these situations. And so, speaking of situations, you do have student situations, you have crises. These are unavoidable. We, all of us who work in higher education, we know that. We know about the small cities that we work in and the way our citizens are either going to behave or not behave, and things are going to happen to them. And student affairs, again, on the front line to this. What does it take to keep a student affairs team and keep those members motivated through all of the stuff that happens?
It really is. It really is tough. I tell people, and this is actually a space, and I'm not ashamed to say that this is a space of growth for me as a supervisor. That when I came into the space, I did not have a clear sense about what it would take. I just assumed that everybody was like me, that, I just love it. So because I love it, let's just do it. Right. And I really needed to focus on individuals, because we all do the, okay, it's Christmas time. We're going to give everybody a Target gift card. And we're going to do all of these kind of, macro level kinds of appreciations or those kinds of things. And, we think they're appreciations, but if you're a student affairs professional and you've spent the last month doing 60 hours a week, that's a really tough space to sit in. And I know definitively that there are professionals who have done those kinds of hours over spans of time. Nobody in their right mind really works 250 hours in a month. You can't even conceptualize that, but it happens when you look at somebody who lives, for instance, a residence life coordinator who lives in the building. So literally the place where they go to sleep is the place where they work. So when there's a person who's having a mental health crisis, or a pipe breaks at 2:00 in the morning, or the air conditioner is out, or mom is upset, they get those phone calls and they have to get up out of their bed, walk down a residence hallway and deal with it, and may not get back to bed until it's time for an 8:00 meeting that we're all sitting there going, after we've been at home, hey, why aren't you at this meeting? And they're just literally I just laid my head on my pillow. And so because that's the case, you really have got to, as a supervisor, you really got to walk into a space and understand that individually there are intrinsic motivations that I need as Roland, that you need as Eddie. And so for some people, that's a staff, that's a lunch or an adult beverage every now and then. For some people, that's public praise. Some people, that is just a quick note. They don't need the public pieces. They just need a quick note to say, hey, I see you. I see that you are doing good work, and let me know if there's anything I can do to support you. For some people, it's just going to be cold hard cash, right? I need, the only way I'm going to feel like I'm being appreciated is if you give me a raise. One of the things that's interesting, though, is that post-COVID, one of the ways that people are seeing a higher level of encouragement is around flexibility to work from home, or even comping days and those kinds of pieces, to say, look, you just work your, student activities, and you just work Thursday through Sunday for homecoming. I'm going to allow you to work from home for the rest of the week so that you can just sit at home and play with your dog and answer emails. And that type of flexibility and such, when I have sat in cabinet meetings, folks around the table are going, why aren't your people in their office? Why aren't they? And it is on me as a supervisor to take that incoming and say, look, my people are on it. They are in it for last 2 weeks. They've been in it 60, 70 hours. They get to stay at home today. Okay, we'll divert calls to this particular office. And that's something I've had to, as a supervisor, I've had to really understand and think about is how do I move into a space of advocacy for staff in a space where they understand that I understand what they're going to and that I protect them at all costs. At the end of the day, student affairs professionals are first responders, and we've got to treat them as such.
Yeah. You're listening to I Want to Work There. I'm Eddie Francis, and we're talking to Roland Bullard. He is a former vice president of student affairs. He's also a higher education consultant. And, that really makes me think about the fact that one of the conversations that has been had so much about higher ed and how higher ed treats faculty and staff, particularly on the staff side, is the need to be creative about figuring out how to make it a fulfilling experience for people. And so with that being said, when you have seen someone in student affairs, and let's take someone who is, for instance, a coordinator and someone who may not necessarily be getting the highest pay, what does it look like when they feel that they are appreciated by not just their supervisor, but the institution as a whole?
So I think that one of the places where you will see that sort of general bump is in morale. And I think morale is such an important part of the culture of a campus. I used to have a friend of mine that he used to tell me all the time that you can walk on a campus and ask about 5 people where are the offices where the morale meter is set.
Oh, wow.
So an example is, I walk on a campus, and most places it's going to be in 2 or 3 offices. One of them is the Office of Financial Aid, because that's typically a place where people, if you're going to get frustrated, or if you're going, or things are going to go great for you, it's probably going to be in that office.
That is where it goes down.
That's where it goes down, right? Is in financial aid. Another one of those places is in the dining hall. When people go into a dining hall, because it's one of those things when you walk into a restaurant and someone has a really bad attitude. When they walk into a restaurant and they have a really bad attitude, it's almost like you don't want them handling your food, right? Like you don't want that.
Oh yeah, no, you don't want that bad spirit in your food. You do not want that.
And it's why we want our grandmothers to make our plate, right? And we want our mom to make our plate, because they're gonna make it with love. They know the things you like extra and all of that kind of thing. And so that really is the same way it happens even in student affairs, where people feel appreciated, and then it bleeds down into the rest of the campus as it relates to morale. And that's when you start to see people to feel appreciated, because I've done well by you as an employee, and then you in turn see your work in a very different light. And then you then say, okay, when I'm interacting with students, if I'm being treated well, if I'm being paid reasonably, if I'm being appreciated, then it's easier when somebody knocks on your door at 2:00 in the morning for you to go, I can get up and do this. But if I know that when I wake up, nobody is going to appreciate me for doing that, and that everybody is going to not take all of that in perspective, then it shows up in some very intentional ways. And you see it as people start to defect and say, you know what, I'm leaving because this place doesn't appreciate me. But you also see people with just a poor general attitude. And that culture then, from where I was sitting as a vice president, I couldn't understand a lot of times why people were so frustrated with the student affairs space. Like, why are you all upset with this? Well, it's because all of my staff at the time when I'm starting are walking around with their lip poked out about working in this space, because they're not appreciated. There's not a level of high morale. And so when I walk into spaces, a lot of times it typically is me trying to address culture and morale. And those are the places where I have to show up and really try to think about the transformation for the space.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news. I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student. what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times best-selling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student-centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
On episode 19, I had our good friend Walter Kimbrough on.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I told him was, and of course you remember this, I said, whenever you would give us that one extra day or those 2 extra days for the holidays, that made such a big difference. Like, I never knew that 24 to 48 hours could make such a big difference when and it sounds like you're saying just little things like that, and it seems little to someone who's on the outside, but to someone who is in the thick of it, to just to be able to get an extra day, even if it is just an extra 24 hours. I mean, it seems that makes a big difference because people just want to know that they are that much more appreciated. Even if it's something like that, it feels like you're appreciated at the very least. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, you mentioned morale several times. Mm-hmm. Does that morale leak down to the students?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And students began to look at, and I used to tell my staff a lot of times, whenever you have an issue with another office, say for instance, how many times have you seen this happen? Student walks into your office and they ask you a question and you go, okay, well, I don't know that. And the student says, well, when I was over in this office, this is what they said.
Oh, yeah.
And you say, well, who is they, right? First of all, you say, who is they? But then you have 2 decisions at that point to make. You can say, okay, well, I'm not sure where we are with this, but let me help you move this along. Or you can turn and say, you know what? They don't know what they're doing in that office anyway. And, I don't even know why you going forward, just come here first because their office is terrible, right? As crazy as that sounds, we see that a lot on campus. And it's because in the moment, students need an answer. And you are using that as a way to, number one, make yourself, look better and endear yourself to the student. But it's also a reflection of the morale on campus and all of the things that are happening. And so students then go, well, man, those offices over there are all terrible. And now they have a reaction and a feeling. So when I get an email from X office as a student, I'm going, man, I don't even want to deal with them. Let me just go to X office because I know they'll get it right. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And we sit in our offices and wonder, well, why won't the students go over to this space and take advantage of these resources? Well, you've spent the last 2 weeks talking poorly about that office. And you've talked and you've showed them how your morale is affecting you as an employee. And those 2 things are connected. So again, as I'm going out to different campuses and I'm talking to folks, I'm saying this to them. We can't let the kids see us fight, right? We can't let the students see us fight. And I don't mean to call the students kids, but I'm thinking about it in the context of like my household. You got a spouse, a partner. The plan is to not let the kids in your house see when there's disagreement so that they don't feel a certain kind of way about living in the space. If you know your parents are always fighting, then you're feeling a certain way. Do I need to pick sides? Do I need to, all of those weird feelings are ones that show up in the context of morale. And so we as professionals have to be sure that we are giving our props where they're due. If you know another office isn't doing the right thing, then maybe it's a conversation you have offline to say, hey, we don't want students to know that this is an issue we have. And if there's a communication gap, then let me figure out how to fix that communication gap. And as a student affairs professional, and my title when I was at Dillard, for instance, was student success. And so I took that part very, very seriously. And to me, the successful student had an outstanding experience. And so if I saw there were offices on campus, even if it was an office that didn't fall under my purview, I would still call over to another vice president and say, hey, look, this is something that's happening in your space and it's affecting the student experience. And also the staff and faculty in the area are getting frustrated, and their morale is showing in the context of this particular situation. What can we do to work together collaboratively to clean this up, so when we have a student that has this issue in another date, that it works out fine? The staff, the faculty appreciate that push by the people that lead the areas to try to work together to fix it, so that it makes their job easier and it makes the student experience better.
Have you ever found that in looking at candidates for positions at the various institutions that you've been at, they would express to you that they noticed something about the work culture, and that either helped them make a decision to apply and go further in the process of interviews, or at some point they said, hey, listen, this isn't quite what I thought it was. I mean, the students look like they're having fun, but the rest of you, I'm not so sure if I want to be a part of this. Have you had people make comments to you about the work culture itself?
Do you mean like prospective employees?
Yeah,
absolutely. So one of the things that I assume as a person that goes out and speaks places or participates in professional development, I assume that people are going to ask questions about what we do, how we do it, and so on and so forth. In fact, before an employee takes a job with me, and you can ask any of them, I always say to them, call X person, call anybody in this division and ask them what it's like to work with me as your supervisor. Get them to give it to you completely straight. Ask them what it's like to serve on this team. Ask them what is the student experience and how they perceive what it means to be a part of this division. I ask them to ask those questions, and it is as much about having the person to have a very transparent sense of what's happening, as much as it is about, what is it that I'm keeping my finger on the pulse of the division to be sure that the culture is one that when people come into it and they are hearing it both from me directly and what they hear from the staff, that we're all saying the same thing. If I find that people are trying to apply with us and they say, you know what, I really want this job, but after interacting with staff and students, this isn't right for me, then I've got work to do. What you find in really toxic environments is that the person sitting in my chair is completely disconnected from what that pulse is. Because I've seen places where the person sitting in my chair is well regarded. Everybody loves that person, but the division and the department is really, really poor. People think highly of the institution, but when it comes to that division or that person, that has been a poor connection. And people say, you know what? Love what they're doing kind of externally, but internally, I would hate to work there. Those are those conversations. So to answer your question, absolutely. We see that, we hear that. When I'm building teams with people, a lot of times it is as easy as saying to a president or a vice president, this person is your issue, and they're keeping you all from being your best selves as a department. And that's a tough conversation to have. Sometimes it's just that people need to trust each other. And so when you hear people say that, hey, we're doing trust walks or we're doing trust exercises, that's a real thing, right? Like really people need to stop for a moment and say, I'm going to trust you because you have expertise in this particular area. And when it comes to this, I'm going to defer to you because I trust you as a professional. And that's something that's really difficult, I think, from time to time for people to do.
Yeah, on one of the episodes that we did, we spoke to, and it was episode 11. And I'm always calling her out on these episodes because it was such a great thing that she said. But we had a recruiter by the name of Brittany King, and one of the things that she talked about was that there's a difference between having people to fit a culture and having people who will help cultivate a culture. And she said you really want people to cultivate the culture.
Yes.
In student affairs, what does it look like when you bring someone in who helps to really cultivate the culture, knowing that it's a tough job, knowing that the pay may be low, but they're really in there? What does it look like for that culture cultivator to come in?
I'm thinking, I won't call his name right now, but I'm thinking of a person that I used to work with when I was on campus. And one of the things that happened with him is that he walked in and asked me aspirationally, what did I want the culture to be? I had only been there about a year, and I sat down and just rolled it out. I talked to him about, a collaborative space. I wanted us to be respected as a division. I wanted us to get into being self-sustained in terms of, money that we would raise from different areas around the city and all of this kind of thing. And if you in a leadership position, if you can find people who are excited about your vision, and that really is your job. Your job is to recruit people who believe in those core values that you have for your division. And that's what they were at the time. It was collaboration and communication, all those pieces. And so in everything that he would do, he would tie those pieces to those core values. I didn't even have to tell him to do it. He just inherently knew that's what it was. And essentially, and I'm not ashamed to say that as I've gone through as a student affairs supervisor, I've learned as much from my supervisor as I've learned from people who work, quote unquote, for me and with me. And I learned that from him, that if you can tie what your vision is to the work that people are doing every day, so it doesn't feel like an add-on or extra, that it feels essentially like the work that you have to do, bringing people on who already embrace those pieces around collaboration, communication, all of the above, made it that much easier. And so having somebody that I brought on that bought in very early allowed me to do the work. And it also allowed me to be more external. And so I didn't have to be on campus all day, every day going, hey, are you doing your work? It was organic. People knew this is what the expectations were. And then they started to rise to that standard. And like Prime says, the standard was the standard. And so that's how that showed up in that space. But you've got to, the work that we do in student affairs is not, and the student affairs people are not going to like this, but it's not rocket science all day, every day. A lot of it is leading with your heart and with compassion and so on and so forth. There's certainly a science to it. There are student development theories and all of the above. But if you can get people who inherently buy into what it means to be a good human being, what it means to think holistically about what it takes to develop a student, then you'll be okay. Not every person who is a great student affairs administrator has gone through all of the student affairs training or has a degree in that space. It's certainly wonderful to have that, but it's why the national organizations have actually come back and created these micro credentials for people to be able to kind of shore up what they know as a good human with student development theories, with frameworks that allow you to think more holistically about what it means to be a professional. I'll leave it there, but I really do believe that if you can just bring people into the space who embrace those core values, then it's a lot easier to do your work.
Well, this comes up on the podcast all the time, though. Isn't it funny how we forget that higher education itself is a people business?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a people business. I mean, you don't have a university if you don't have people. So, I mean, just really understanding how to work with people. The people who are taking the classes and the people who are teaching the classes and the people who keeping the place open is really funny to me. And this is part of the reason I do this podcast. It's just really funny to me how we just tend to forget that higher education is a people business.
It is. And I think that a lot of times, and you're starting to see this show up in some very clear spaces. I thought I was going to get this through this conversation without going into DEI, but we're seeing across the country as, state governments are saying, we think that this DEI piece is horrible. We've got to get rid of it. It's divisive or whatever the crazy talk is. But inherently, what folks are forgetting in that conversation is that a part of the reason why a lot of those initiatives were created was because of people, that we needed to be able to look at people and appreciate them for who they were in the moment. All of this, I don't see color and all of this kind of thing. To me, it's like my old professors say, it's hogwash, right? It's something that the DEI piece allows us to look at people individually for who they are and understand and think about how to ensure that they are engaged fairly, how we think about our practices with a frame of inclusivity, with equity and justice. And I think that it's something that we forget even as administrators, that when we're thinking about who we're going to let go, who we're going to lay off, who we're going to, when we do the furloughs and such, I know that there's lots of institutions, for instance, that they say if you're at a certain salary range, you don't have to pay health insurance. That's somebody thinking about what it means to have a salary that if I've got a 6-figure salary and I've got a family, but if I have a 5-figure salary with the family, we're paying the same amount for healthcare. There's something inherently problematic about that in some ways, right? Not to say that people don't need to pay their fair share, but there's also that something that says how to make sure that it's fair for everybody who's moving around this profession and doing all of this tough work and are in the trenches and are the front facing people. And so I'll get off my soapbox over on that with that. But I do think that you're absolutely right. We forget that it's about people. It's about being fair. It's about who we're facing as we do our work.
And I will just say this one, I'll just go on my one little tangent about it because I don't think you can have a conversation without higher education without having a conversation about DEI. Right. And that's because college campuses are DEI laboratories. I mean, even if ethnically homogenous, even if, you and I worked at HBCUs, wonderfully diverse places, wonderfully diverse places with people with their different backgrounds and their different neighborhoods and their different states and their different regions and all of that good stuff. So yeah, you're fine. It's cool. Very cool for this podcast. So I always like to ask my guests about the way forward for colleges and universities so that they do build great employer brands. And assuming that there's always a need for resources when it comes to student affairs, what should colleges and universities do to provide fulfilling talent experience for student affairs professionals?
First, I would say that we've got to, and I mentioned this when I mentioned earlier about interviewing prospective staff when they come on board, we have to understand where it is people want to go. And to me, folks may say, okay, well, I know I've had people sit across me and say, well, in 3 years, I just want to be here and I want to be a great staff member and this kind of thing. And I've said, no, here's unsolicited advice. You're going to stay about 2 years. And on year 2, we're going to move you on to something else that better utilizes the skills you've learned over the last 2 years. And they've gone, what? Yes, that's what we're going to do. You don't know it yet, but you're going to be an outstanding student affairs professional, and people are going to want you to come work for them. I don't want you to stay in this space. Give somebody else the opportunity to do this entry-level position, and then we'll move on to do something else. And that, it shocks people a lot of times. One of the main reasons I say that is because I want people to know that, first of all, I'm going to be pushing. I'm going to be trying to pour into you as much as I can over the time that you're here with me. Again, that's one of those places for growth for me. I never thought about it like that until I got a little further along in my career, when I understood that people did that for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was the reason why I was able to be a vice president in my early 30s, was because people poured in, because I said, that's what I want to do. And so they said, okay, well, if you want to do that, here are some experiences I'm going to give you that are going to allow you to place the foundation where when it's time, you won't have to get ready, you will be ready. And so that's what we have to do, is we've got to understand what that is. The next thing I would say is that we really have to explore ways to compensate student affairs professionals a lot better. Now, certainly, like you said, you gave the disclaimer at the beginning of this question, which was, hey, we know that we need more resources and all the above. The reason I'm pointing this out is because a lot of times when we're in the boardroom, we're having conversations about, well, it's time that faculty get an increase. Well, it's time that these directors or other people get an increase. It's like, what about the police officers? What about the student affairs professionals who are getting up at 2 a.m.? What are we doing to say, we see you and we encourage you? If we need to say, every third year, the faculty get this increase, and every fourth year, then the student affairs people get whatever strategy we've got to put in. Now, we all want an increase every year. But if we're not in a position to do that, make sure that the student affairs people are at minimum on the cycle, right?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of schools where the student affairs people are not even discussed on that cycle. And it's really sad. It's really sad. And it's because there's so much turnover in a lot of times in the student affairs spaces. They're not considered as important to that conversation. Well, let's assume there is turnover. It means then, if you were to be sure that they're on the cycle, that whoever comes in will be moved into a market rate. So I don't have to go back and try to find an extra $10,000 or $15,000 because they've stayed on the market rate. That's the way to do that. That's the way to strategically ensure that even if people leave, the next person comes in is sitting at market rate for student affairs professional, if not being paid better. And so that's one of those things I want us to think about. Additional compensation may not come in the form of finances. It may come in the form of professional development or flexibility. And, there's lots of research out there now that says that people will take a job where I've got flexibility in place of compensation. I've got the ability to leave work at 3 p.m., go pick up my kids, not have to pay after school rates, get them set up with their evening, meal, and then come back out to the school and do whatever evening program I have, and then go back home. People will sign up for that because that allows them a level of flexibility that you can't get a lot of times in corporate America, because they're going to want to work you 8 to 5, if not till 6. And this is what that is. So when you think about these folks who've worked all these crazy hours, what kind of flexibility or additional professional development can you give them, especially with regard to that first question I've asked? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What's important to you? And even if I'm not paying you enough, if I'm giving you this credential, if I'm helping you get through your master's degree or your doctorate, then, oh, wow, this place is not so bad. I would like to make a little more money, but they are paying for my master's degree. It's working out. Okay. Find ways to celebrate them regularly. I think October is Student Affairs Month. That's a great month because typically at HBCUs, we're in homecoming season.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great month right at the end of that month to say to the student affairs people, you guys did it. Y'all made it happen.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And then the last thing, and we haven't talked enough about this in this conversation, is to protect them at all costs. And by that, I mean that we've got to check in with them on the piece around mental health.
Psychological safety.
Safety.
Yeah.
You know this as well as I know. A couple of years ago, all HBCUs were in the throes of bomb threats. And if you remember, this is 7:15 in the morning when we were at Dillard. We're moving 700 students off campus at 7 o'clock in the morning, trying to get them to safety because we didn't know what was going to happen with them. What we forgot about in that moment were who are the people who then had to go back into that space and find out where people were. Because when mom called, she wanted to know that her baby was out of that building and this kind of thing. Those were the student affairs people that were doing that. And them, along with the police, they're the ones who are in the midst of that. When we had a gas leak. Remember, we had a gas leak.
Oh, I remember it. Yeah, I'd only been there a couple of months. I remember.
And it was the same kind of conversation. People want a level of service, and it's the customer service experience for an institution that a lot of time extends from the student affairs office, but it really starts to weigh on your mental health. And so you really have to take time. I really do believe they need a special set of, and student affairs people need a special set of mental health support just because of the work that they're doing all day, every day. So to me, those are the four things I think that you really got to really kind of focus on if you want them to have a great experience.
Roland Bullard, he is a former vice president of student affairs. He's also a higher education consultant. Hey, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
You can reach out to me at my email is easy, roland.bullard@gmail.com. Let me know how I can be helpful to you. I really do believe in the transformational work of education. And I do believe that teams, especially student affairs teams, are the ones that drive the work that we're doing on campus. And so any way that I can help to make those teams more efficient or just have a little more fun at the work that we're doing every day, just let me know.
All right. And we love LinkedIn here. Are you on LinkedIn?
I am. Just throw me in there, Roland Bullard, and inbox me, and I'll certainly reach out and let you know how I can be helpful.
Got your back. So his link is right there in the notes. Roland, thank you so much for joining me on I Want to Work There.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
I Want to Work There is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, check out other Enrollify shows. The Enrollify Podcast Network is growing by the month with all kinds of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows. And they're jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. There are some great industry voices that you can check out, like Terry Flannery, my good friend Jamie Hunt, Allison Tercio, Corinne Myers, Dustin Ramsdell, Jamie Gleason, and many more. Learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. So come and find yours.